Started because we have a long agenda. How are you? This court will come to order. Are we ready? I'd like to call to order the Cuyahoga County Council Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, July 22nd, 2014. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll?
Calling the roll, Ms. Simon? I'm here. Mr. Greenspan?
Here.
Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Mr. Germana?
Here.
Mr. Gallagher?
Here.
Mr. Schron?
Here.
Ms. Conwell?
Here.
Mr. Jones?
Here.
Mr. Hairston?
On his way.
And Ms. Conley? There is a quorum.
Sorry. We have a number of items. On the agenda, and we also have a moment now for public comment related to the agenda. And I think some people are here for item 3, the demolition fund. And what I would like to do is have the people who want to speak on the charter resolutions to speak, and then we'll call those folks who are here for the demolition contracts or demolition issues. So is anyone here for public comment related to the charter amendments?
Madam Chair, there's no one who has signed in.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to turn the chair over to Mr. Greenspan. This is always a very difficult situation because I have to move to the right and he moves to the left. And he's going to chair the items related to the charter amendments.
Mr. Chair, it looks like there may be one or two who are signing in to speak regarding the charter.
Okay, we'll allow them the opportunity to prepare that. We'll continue on with the agenda. We have 2 charter proposed resolutions before us. These were left over from our previous 2 meetings that we did not have an opportunity to address due to time constraints. Just a reminder that to this body, as I led off the last meeting, we have a history on this body being respectful of each other's beliefs, and I'd like us to continue that same philosophy and exercise those values as we move forward with these 2 items. As a practice last meeting, we allowed 3 minutes for public comment at the beginning of the meeting and then 90 seconds for each of the 2 items. So we will continue with that same practice. So if the clerk would read the first item in, this will be a 3-minute reading.
Resolution number 2014-0141, a resolution providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment to Article 14 to the Cuyahoga County Charter to provide that the right to vote is a fundamental right in the county and authorize the county to take action to protect and promote the right to vote, and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective.
Okay, very good. This item now has been read for discussion. Is there anyone from the public who wishes to address this? These will be, these will be 90-second presentations. Is there anyone that wishes to speak who is signed in to speak?
No, Mr. Chairman, not for this item.
Okay, very good, thank you. This item before us today was sponsored by the executive and Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon, if you'd like to be heard on this.
Sure, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Well, we've discussed this in several committee meetings, and I just want to reiterate the purpose of this amendment is twofold. One of which is to ensure and to enshrine that voting in this county is a fundamental right, and that as a county we hold this to be a most important value. And secondly, that this amendment would ensure that we will be able as a county to institute legal action through the law department to protect the right to vote and access to the ballot and undertake measures to promote voter registration, including but not limited to early voting initiatives. This was born out of what we're seeing around us in the last year of the whittling away of our right to vote and whittling away what Cuyahoga County has seen as a benefit in terms of getting the vote out by voter applications by mail, early voting, Sundays, and the week before the election. The Voting Rights Act has been implicated by a deterioration of the rights that we've experienced in Cuyahoga County, which really got us to a place where we don't have long lines anymore, like we saw in the first 2004 presidential election. So this is important to be in our charter because it really enshrines the value that we hold as utmost important in this county. So I ask my colleagues to support this, to make sure that we will make sure our citizens can vote often and early. And in terms of the proposed amendment substitute, that's not from me. I don't have a proposed substitute amendment. I just have what's before us is the original version, which gives our law department the right to take legal action to ensure the right to vote and really to set forth us as a home rule county. And that's really, really important as well. Mr. Chair, if I can, there's a whereas clause in here at this point that needs to be stricken because it's not related to this particular amendment. It appears to be a typo.
This is not in the substitute. The substitute was my substitute, so not in that, but you're talking about in the original resolution? Okay, I'll proceed.
So in the resolution, the only resolution before us, there's a third whereas clause, which talks about best interest of citizens to extend time to act on executive appointments. So clearly that's not related to the voting rights amendment. So I want to move that we strike that.
Very good.
First page, third whereas.
There's been a motion, a second, to remove the third whereas in Resolution 2014-0141. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all in favor, we'll do a voice vote on this. All in favor of striking the third whereas provision signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, that item is removed. Any further discussion?
No, just to be clear that the substitute is yours and not mine.
All right, thank you. There's no further discussion. I'd like to introduce my substitute resolution. And I'll go ahead and briefly discuss it first. This one is actually very simple. It enshrines the sentiments of Ms. Simon in that this resolution effectively adds in the preamble to our charter the language which is found on page 2, starts at the end of the paragraph. Okay, we'll correct that. I'm just explaining the amendment before we bring it up. All it does effectively is discuss, as Ms. Simon discussed, the value this community places on fundamental voting rights. The charter itself is a value-based document, and that is what this provision enshrines. This amendment, it does remove the legal action that is in the original resolution. And I reviewed through the charter, and I saw nowhere else in the charter where are we asking the voters, or are the voters granted this county by charter the right to enact a lawsuit. So in keeping with that spirit, I'm not going to debate again. We've had discussion with the legalities of what that ordinance says or doesn't say. If the intent is here merely to place a value on voting, then this amendment does that in the charter and the preamble as we discuss other items such as improved focus on equity in all of our communities and citizens, collaboration, competitiveness, those types of items. This merely continues that same line of thought and saying we value citizens' right to vote as a statement and leaves to ordinance, as this council has adopted, any actions to protect and preserve. So I'll make that motion. I want to explain what the what the resolution was all about. So I'll make a motion to substitute Resolution 2014-0141.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the resolution?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Ms. Simon.
Of course. Mr. Chair, thank you for your substitute, but I vehemently oppose it altogether because what it does is essentially guts the entire intent of the resolution that I introduced. It takes away any kind of action whatsoever to enforce the fundamental right to vote. As I stated, the purpose of this amendment is twofold. One is to enshrine the fundamental right to vote, but then without the right to take action through our legal department, it just renders it completely worthless and toothless tiger. So for my colleagues, I don't support this proposed substitute at all because it really means nothing if it were to go on the ballot as it's currently proposed by my colleague.
And I disagree with Ms. Simon's position that it doesn't do anything, because to say it does nothing would just say that none of the other 6 preambles of our document do anything, and I think they all set the foundation and the basis. That was the basis for which we actually passed legislation to create the $100 million fund. It was the basis for which we are taking many of the actions in the economic development. And to say that somehow that this language gives us the ability to sue, I noticed that the law director has had no trouble whatsoever for the last few years bringing action in regards to this and bringing matters before. So I don't, to say that we have not taken action would be disingenuous, I believe, to everybody here that would think that we have not taken and pushed back already. So we do have that authority. We have taken actions. And if you look at the 7 preambles that are currently in place, those are aspirational as much as what you're saying. You wanted it to be in here as a fundamental right. That's what the statement is.
Okay, very good. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Jones and Mr. Germana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support Councilwoman Sunny Simon wholeheartedly in her rejection of this particular proposed substitute. And I'd just like to, again, just take a moment just to share just how critical the fundamental right to vote is, how important it is that early voting in particular, how important it is to Democrats in this county. This is a Democratic county. It's a core belief that we have the right to vote. And I'll just share again just 2 quick examples. When I was campaigning, simply going door to door, I was in Garden Valley, the heart of public housing, and knocked on a young lady's door, and she answered. She had just come home from work. She had her 2 children. I could see in the background watching TV. She was cooking dinner, and I'm there asking for her vote. Now, she has gotten a ballot in the mail, and the ballot is sitting on the coffee table in the back. And she doesn't have a lot of time, but she does answer the door for me. And we have a conversation. But the fact that she had that ballot there, it showed that a hardworking person who doesn't have a lot of time, but the right to vote early, and we call it voting early and voting by mail, but for her it meant voting at home, voting from home, being able to take the time to go through the ballot and Google judges who sometimes you don't know who they are, but the ability to from home to learn about elected officials who have a greater impact on your life as a judge than even we as council or mayors. A judge can take your property, your life, all these things, and the ability to vote from home is critical. Another gentleman I met knocked on his door, and he had a friend sitting on his sofa. Now, this friend had come out of incarceration, and he said, well, I'm going to vote early. This was during the presidential. He said, I'm going to vote early. And I encouraged him to take the young man who was with him, take him down and let him register to vote. Go down to the Board of Elections and register. Many times when you've come out of incarceration, just the ability to vote again can psychologically have a positive impact in your life and root you back into the community. So these things we should be promoting. We should be actively engaged in helping the residents of this county to exercise their right to vote. So amendments like this that hamper our ability to promote this one act, I don't support, and that's what I feel this proposed substitute does. And again, I support Councilwoman Sunny Simon's original amendment wholeheartedly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Germana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support both of these. My question is to the law director. On the substitute, if we adopted the substitute, wouldn't that give us all the protection of being able to sue as we deem needed to protect the right to vote and participation?
A couple of points to clarify, and I know the right to sue has been mentioned, but this is listed as an example of one of the rights that we would have. I mean, it's the intent of the original amendment and the way that it's drafted is it's establishing the right to vote as a fundamental right and then enabling the county through legislation, through action, to take measures to protect that right to vote. And the institution of legal action is one of the examples that's listed. The promotion of voter registration, all these things are examples of what's listed. The whereas clause is what it is. It's a whereas clause. It's an aspirational statement, but it's really having a whereas. Every other whereas clause that we have in the charter, there is a provision in the charter that enforces that whereas clause. So we have economic development in the whereas clause, but we have specific provisions in the charter that enforce the economic development aspirations of the charter. We have a whereas clause in the charter that talks about the separation of powers. We have specific provisions in the charter that separate the powers between an executive and a council. Just having something in the whereas clause without the actual provisions carrying out that whereas clause becomes, rendered, I don't mean to say meaningless, but it's a statement without any teeth. And what we're trying to do through this charter amendment is to remove any cloud over the county's ability to enter this field. Yes, we've been acting in that field, and we truly believe that we have the power to do it. But that doesn't shield us from others challenging our ability to do it. What this amendment does is it protects us against such challenges is because it enshrines it in the charter. The voters have voted on it. It's unequivocally in our charter that that's one of the powers that the voters intended to give to the county when they enact the charter by that charter amendment. So I understand the aspirational statement in the whereas clause, but that becomes nothing. I mean, it sounds very good, but at the end of the day, it doesn't do anything. The example that this is for the lawyers, but it's as if enacting the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution without Section 5 to the 14th Amendment. You wouldn't have been able to enact the Voting Rights Act without Section 5 of the 14th Amendment. You need the enforcement clause that comes with that aspirational statement. And that's what the amendment that originally was proposed by the Councilman Simon and the county executive does. The proposed substitute really just is a flowery statement, but doesn't have any of the teeth or the grant of power that we were asking the voters to clarify through this voter amendment. And I would just sort of make a statement, this may have been, necessity is the mother of invention, and this may have been prompted by the recent, the voter suppression efforts and the recent actions at the state level, but this should be, without any of this stuff, a provision like this should be in every charter, should be in every constitution. With or without what's happening at the state level, without anything, the idea that we care enough about voting and that we will take action to promote voting and protect the right to vote should be in every constitution. It should go without saying that that's something that should be in every constitution. And I think we could be a model to a lot of other counties, to a lot of other places, that we enshrine this power in our charter. We make it very clear in our charter. We're all very proud of our charter in the sense we always cite, our charter is, I think, the very first constitution.
Mr. McClue, I
But my
appreciate it.
point is-
I understand. Mr. Germano's question was a yes or no answer, so
He got the answer.
I know we got more than we,
He got the context.
okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Germano, did you have any?
I was just going to say, I guess the answer is no.
Okay.
I would have been supportive of your amendment if he would have wavered and said, yes, we could sue and so on. So I like the simplicity of your amendment, but since having heard the reasons, I'm going to be voting against the amendment.
Okay, Mr. Gallagher.
On its surface, being against this would be against mom and apple pie also, which may be added to this. But you get to the area of being able to sue, Mr. McCloof, do not the citizens already have an ability to challenge if they feel disenfranchised in an election?
Again, that's
That's a yes or no.
that's what I'm trying.
No,
It's
no,
not
no,
a
no.
yes or no. It's
I go, there's an election, I'm disenfranchised, I can't go anywhere.
You can sue within the limitations of the
Thank
Voting
you.
Rights Act.
So
but
the problem
having the
I-
financial resources to
Sir,
institute that litigation.
Sir.
Okay.
Thank you. The concern that I have is if every constitution or county's charter had this in, then you're affording the right of anyone in the county to have the law director or the legal, whoever that person would be, within the county, to sue during an election. So you, in essence, could be inviting 88 different lawsuits in a statewide or national election. You would become a joke, a national joke, which is why this isn't in the constitutions or the charters of anybody's, any state, any county, anywhere. So if we're going to do it, and I'm in Wayne County, then I'm going to do it. Because I know in Cuyahoga County, the Democrats are going to sue if they think they're losing. Down in Wayne, if the Republicans think they're losing, they're going to sue, and they're going to hold this thing up. It's not simple. It's not clear cut. And I would support it without this in there. This is taking a step, I think, outside the realm of what we're supposed to be. You're affecting, with this, in essence, you're sending a signal to 87 other counties to do this and to screw up a national or statewide election if you don't like what's going on. And the only other thing that I'll say, and when we have something such as important as this, I would have expected at least a single citizen to come up here and testify that they were disenfranchised, and boy, this would have been good for me to have. I hear it from politicians, but I don't hear it from the citizenry that they're disenfranchised, and that in essence, I need a politician to help me go vote because I'm not smart enough, I'm not available enough. This is a horse out of the barn that's gone out of control since we've expanded elections. Again, my dad worked at a power plant near Erie, Pennsylvania in the 60s. He got home to vote. He got home to vote. So without this exception in the body of this amendment, I would support it. But I think we're going outside of what we're supposed to be. And I think you're actually stepping on the Secretary of State's ability to control elections or the court's abilities to control elections for the citizens, not the politicians. So that's the problem I see with this, is you're expanding your bite at the apple as a county in a state, potential statewide and national election where we will become literally the joke again, because we have been the butt of jokes in the past. We will become the butt of jokes again in the future if this is to pass this way, because it will spread like a cancer, and a cancer it is.
Okay, Mr. Sharon.
Yeah, I just have a series of comments. Mr. Jones had some great examples, but the examples were all of people having the opportunity to vote under the system. There was no one, based on your examples that you listed, that was restricted, constrained, or had any inability to vote. Your examples where somebody had a ballot in their home and had 30 days to put that ballot in the mail. I guess I have a hard time understanding how 30 days is any kind of constraint on their ability to vote. I have a hard time understanding how that the choices and the opportunities were restricted when they could have chosen to study and do all these things you talked about in their home at their leisure. So your examples were monumental recognition that we don't have any constraint on voting. It seems to me, this is, in my opinion, and I would agree with my colleague on this, that this is really, if we look at it, this is all about electioneering for somebody to drive an issue for themselves, I personally believe. We're walking down a very slippery slope as we start to pick apart the charter and putting in individual items that each one of us likes or dislikes. The idea of a document without all this specificity is what makes this, I really believe, a jewel. This council, as we move along in the years, as every one of these things takes place and people start putting in specific items that they want to see on the charter, they get their 8 votes, it goes on the ballot, and we keep driving, and now putting in the right to sue. I know that there's colleagues up here that want to change the way in which this aspirational goals are about economic development, and they want to see us adding things in there. Well, what stops the next council if we're saying that green jobs are what we need to have in the county charter in this job section and add that specificity? The strength of this document is that we leave it for the general aspects. You have had no trouble suing anybody. To answer Mr. Germano's question, which was a yes or no, have you had any trouble suing anybody for the last 3.5 years? And the answer is no. You brought action after action after action. So I think that if the my colleague said she wanted to have the fundamental right to vote as stated in here, this is achieved by this amendment. To go on with all the adding of all the points and counterpoints. There's nothing in here about electronic voting and about whether or not you can vote in the state, out of the state. Who knows where these dialogues are all taking place on your cell phone from California. I mean, where will this end? And I think this document should not go down into micromanaging how we vote.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Simon.
Obviously, Mr. Schron, my colleague, was addressing me and my motives behind bringing this forward to this council. And I take great objection to him insinuating or stating that the motivation behind this amendment is for political gain. I have been advocating the right and voting rights of residents of this county from day one when the Secretary of State, whose toes I will gladly step on, who has stepped up to take away the votes one by one from this county. This has to do with principles, Mr. Schron. It has nothing to do with election year, unlike an amendment that my colleague introduced to take away the partisan nature of the election when somebody's running for executive of this county. So if we're going to sit here and give motivation for this fundamental right to vote, which is a principle that I think our residents deserve and aspire to. And by the way, this is nonpartisan. And by the way, the League of Women Voters supports this full-heartedly. So this is about our residents' vote. And what we've seen is egregious and shameful coming out of this state. This is a way for us to make sure that our residents will not see a dwindling of their opportunities, and every person on this council should be stepping up and saying, yes, I will do everything in my power to make sure that voting is easier, that voting will be available in all forms to our residents, not to take it away. So I take umbrage with getting personal on this council because I'm not going to stand for that. This is a principle, not an election. Furthermore, anything that's screwing up the elections here has to do with the suppression. We have had orderly elections since we started by mail applications without being solicited, and it's only because of the confusion from the state that the elections are getting screwed up, and that's what's making us a laughingstock.
Okay, thank you. Any further comment? My closing comment on this, almost as it was when I began this statement. I believe that these two charter amendments proposals that we're talking about today are the first two charter amendments that actually add to the body of the charter as opposed to clarify language that's in the charter. And so we're somewhat opening up a new door as we discuss these two items. The charter is in and of itself an aspirational document. We currently have the right, as was passed by this council, to not a unanimous vote, but was supported by this council, to sue, to do whatever is necessary. Actually, I believe the powers of that ordinance far go beyond the provisions in 14.02 of this proposal. As Mr. Gallagher said, it's like, it's like apple pie and motherhood as far as all of us agree to the fact that protecting the fundamental right to vote should be an aspirational component of the charter. No one has objection to that. The objection comes to codifying what we already have by ordinance, which there, as was discussed at the time, I'm not going to rehash the discussion of the ordinance passing, there also are components of that ordinance which very well may be against one or more state laws. So this charter amendment actually would be asking voters to codify something that very well may be against state law. That's why I brought forward the amendment to deal with the value and vision of the charter as opposed to an enforcement component, and not place that in the charter and leave that to an ordinance. So if there's no further discussion, we'll have a roll call vote on the amendment. Madam Clerk, please call the roll. On the substitute.
Calling the roll to adopt the substitute that was proposed by Councilman Greenspan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before we do that, there was public comment, correct? Ms. Mayor wished to speak? Is that the only person?
On this item, it was.
Okay, well, 90 seconds, please, if you'd like to come speak.
Is that it? Good. I'm vice president of the new Greater Cleveland League of Women Voters, and we wanted to make a statement in favor of the passage of this amendment as we expected it would have. It was written. Okay, we did not know about the substitute, and I was 10 minutes late. So I do want to urge you all to pass the Voting Rights Amendment. As far as the substitution, before you vote on that one, it seems to me that any statement of principle is stronger if there are teeth in it. And so I think we would probably agree anything that improves the likelihood of greater voter turnout far outweighs the other concerns which many people have voiced on the subject of fraud or of unanimity between counties, etc. Excuse me. So my remarks that I prepared don't exactly fit the moment that you're giving me the mic. Thanks for the mic. And we will do everything we can to support the full strength of this amendment. We would probably support it if it were emasculated as well, but please don't do that.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other public comment? No.
No, not for this item.
Okay, very good. So the motion has been made and seconded to substitute Resolution 2014-0141. If the clerk would please call the roll for the substitute.
Ms. Simon?
No to the substitute.
Ms. Conley?
No.
Mr. Miller?
No.
Mr. Brady?
No.
Mr. Germana? Gallagher? Yes. Mr. Schron? Yes. Ms. Conwell?
No.
Mr. Jones?
No.
Mr. Hairston?
No.
Mr. Greenspan? Yes. The motion has failed.
Okay, thank you. Now on to the original resolution 2014-0141. The item has been before us. It's been made, motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the motion before we hear a vote? Hearing none, with Mr. Schron.
Yes, I will not be supporting this, but I am supporting all opportunities for opening up the voting. As I've indicated in the past, we should be looking at electronic, digital, all kinds of forms of techniques, and to start making a laundry list and putting it and codifying it right in the charter. Can you imagine what the size of our Constitution would look like today if we did this every time we had an issue of this nature? Thank you.
Any other comment? I too will be voting no on this, although I do support and have been an advocate for encouraging early in-person and absentee voting. This is not the form insofar as putting the provisions as I discussed in my previous statement. There's no other comment. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
There is no motion to move this to the full council for second reading. Is
Okay.
that what you're going for?
Ms. Simon?
I'm going to move that we move this to the full council for second.
Okay, so motions are made, and we're talking about for second reading for tonight's meeting of July 22nd. Motion's been made by Ms. Simon, seconded by Ms. Conwell. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, roll call vote.
All right, roll call vote to move this to the full council for second reading at tonight's meeting. Simon?
Yes.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Greenspan? No. Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Germana?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher? Mr. Schron?
No.
Ms. Conwell?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Yes.
And Mr. Hairston?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. That item carries 8-3 and will be on tonight's agenda for second reading. Will the clerk please read Resolution 2014-0163 into the record?
Resolution number 2014-0163, a resolution providing for the submission to the electors of the County of Cuyahoga an amendment enacting Article 14 of the Charter of Cuyahoga County, establishing the agency of Inspector General in the charter and declaring the necessity that this resolution become immediately effective. And there are two speakers who wish to address this item.
If you please call the two speakers up, 90 seconds, please.
Mayor Bruce Akers.
Mr. Chairman, Madam President, members of council. In the wake of the county corruption investigations, which ultimately led to this present new form of government, it became clear that Cuyahoga County required additional enforcement capabilities to address actions by county employees and to respond to allegations about the county workforce and its operations. This council and the current county executive are to be commended for the fact they passed an ordinance establishing the Inspector General position. And we commend you for that. Of the 15 amendments that the Charter Review Commission presented to you last year, this was, we considered, one of the most important. And of the remaining 11, as I mentioned to you last week, we reconvened the Charter Review Commission, and we unanimously said, that we agreed that this putting the IG into the charter, we felt was the single most important. And we urged that support. Last year there were some comments about, well, maybe it doesn't need to be done at this time. There were some concerns about maybe the current occupant and all that. We think it's past time to get that in there. We're worried, what if a future council does not have the enlightenment that you did? A future county executive does not have the enlightenment of the current one and decides either to gut this or pay no attention to it. That would be a serious, serious blow to good government in this county. We urge you, therefore, to get this into the charter so there won't be a chance of that happening. And we think that it's important that,
Just finish your statement.
Thank you. On behalf of my fellow colleagues of the Charter Review Commission, we urge you to support this, and we urge you to pass this on to let the voters render their decision to establish this permanently. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you.
And Linda Mayer.
I'm just reminding all speakers, 90 seconds, please.
Our county charter requires that the county adopt a code of ethics, which we have famously done. However, in our League of Women Voters and Ethics Transition Work Group research, we discovered that ethics policies of other governmental bodies always include a provision on an enforcement mechanism. Ours does not. And the greatest rules in the world are nothing without enforcement teeth. The need here has been filled by the creation of our agency of the Inspector General. But this office exists only in an ordinance which could at any time be amended or repealed. So far, the IG exists only at the pleasure of the county council. As there appears to be no appetite for the creation of a county ethics board, that was our recommendation, the Inspector General fulfills the need for ethics enforcement. It needs to be a charter office created to be as independent of council and executive interference as possible. The LWV has testified often on this point, and we are prepared to support and work for this charter amendment proposal. Our memories are long, and there can be no slipping back. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, very good. Let me on behalf of this, as the sponsor of this, as the sponsor of the ethics ordinance, the Inspector General ordinance that is currently enacted by the county, and as someone who saw the value of this in March of 2010 as a candidate. We've had many discussions over the past few years on the creation of a charter amendment for the purpose of an Inspector General, and we have had many variations of proposals before this body, some of which have been very lengthy and some of which have been very brief. This one, fundamentally, if we talk about aspirational components of our charter, creates the aspirational enforcer of the ethics ordinance itself, as Ms. Mayor mentioned. What we're doing here fundamentally is we are creating another charter office, such as we have the fiscal officer or the sheriff or the medical examiner. If you look at how this is structured, it is structured in a very similar componency to the sheriff. We merely establish the powers, the qualifications, the appointment and the term, the removal process, and the vacancy provisions. All other items, some items that are critical to having an independent Inspector General, such as financing, are left currently, are excluded from this and left to this body, as are the components and job duties left by ordinance. So fundamentally, what we're doing here is creating another charter amendment, another charter office under Article 5, very similar in structure. Well, it's Section 14, but an Article 5 related office whose structure is defined by the residents. It's codified that they believe, as I believe, that this is an essential component to an ethical, transparent, and accountable government. And I urge my colleagues' support. And so far, Madam President, Mr. Germana have wished to speak, correct? Madam President?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be voting in opposition to this. I fully support the position of the Inspector General, but I do not believe that it needs to be put into the charter. This office costs us approximately $1 million a year. It fundamentally alters the relationship of the employees to the supervisor. If you are an employee and you are doing something wrong, then it is part of the task of your supervisor to shepherd you and make sure that you are following the rules. Now everybody just turns everything over to Inspector General. So we spend thousands of dollars to inspect and do things that to have the Inspector General investigate somebody in the print shop who's maybe printing up something wrong, whose supervisor said, you're not doing this properly, you shouldn't be doing this, and I'm going to discipline you. I just think that, and I've made this argument a number of times before, the IG for the state of Ohio is not in the state constitution. I strongly believe that you don't just put things in the Constitution willy-nilly, that I support the agency of the Inspector General. I want it to continue, but I do not believe that this is a matter that should be placed in the charter.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Germana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do support this. You know, in reference to what the president just spoke about. This has been something new. And I don't know if that was what's prompted all these small complaints about maybe to supervisors, but the big picture is, we went through a scandal where I believe it was up to 60 people have been convicted. And no one blew any whistle. And this went on for years. And the reason they didn't, because there was such power there. Jobs and careers were on the line. Now we have strong whistleblower protection with the Inspector General. And, we're a little bit different in Cuyahoga County. I mean, we represent 10% of the population in the state of Ohio. And as I've said before, we're setting the stage of how counties should be run, or at least urban counties should be run. So I fully support this.
Thank you. Any other, Mr. Sharon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be supporting this, having spent time in the United States Army and in the criminal justice system, and being fully aware of the significance of an independent inspector general and how critical it is to ensure that that there is no appearance of impropriety going on between anybody. That we want to make sure we lock this into the charter as a new office, as a commitment just as critical and just as important. We cannot ever go back to what we came out of 4 years ago. We, as a county, know the risk of it. And just if there are some operational startup issues where they're investigating things that are of a minor nature, that's strictly the mechanical piece that needs to get addressed, and they can do that through operational controls. We need to be making the statement that the Inspector General is something that we should be supporting. Believe it or not, I understand through conversations that I've had that there is a group afoot to actually take and dissolve and want us to go all the way back to county commissioners. Scary thought that there's some conversations afoot taking place. Be careful of those things. Something like an Inspector General and IG being in place will give us that one more step of assurance of inspection. And I was wholeheartedly in favor of the Sheriff's Office carrying that same role, but it didn't carry the weight. But this is a statement that has been supported by the League of Women Voters, being supported by, it's the #1 item that they wanted last year on as far as the charter review, which was a nonpartisan group of people coming forward. And I think that we would be doing a disservice not to lock this into the charter.
Any other comments from members of the council? Ms. Simon?
If that substitute, when did you want to handle that?
That's a good point. I see the substitute. Let me do this real quick before we do that. And Mr. Boyle, I'm assuming your comments are as an observer to the Charter Review Commission?
Well, no, on behalf of Executive Fitzgerald,
Okay.
and just very briefly, not too often in the campaign previously for the outset of the county council and county executive, my guess is there wasn't a whole lot of overlap in positions between now Executive Fitzgerald and Councilman Greenspan, but this is one that they did share. The concept of the implementation of the county executive and the formality of putting that position into the county charter is something that Councilman Greenspan, I know that you supported that from the outset, and Executive Fitzgerald did as well. And I think it is something, in terms of what we look at in potential backsliding, as you said, Councilman Sharon, and some other aspects, we can't forget where we are in relation to where we were. I don't know, the devil is in the details, but I know that, Councilman, you spent a great deal of time and energy on addressing the independence of the position, both from a fiscal and operational aspect, and I think that that's something that Executive Fitzgerald joins you in optimistically hoping that this will be a charter position as well. Obviously, I know there's some amendments coming forward, but conceptually, the position is one that would be, in Executive Fitzgerald's position, would be extremely, we would be extremely, be a great position to have it in the charter.
Okay, thank you. Before us, and I appreciate Ms. Simon bringing that forward, is a proposed substitute. Ms. Simon, as the sponsor of that substitute, got to discuss that.
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. I brought forth a substitute to this particular resolution for the reasons stated to some extent by our President Connolly. I agree that on the one hand that we need this office, but on the other hand, I want to make sure that this office doesn't become bloated and unto itself a bureaucracy that is out of balance to that which we need. And that was one of the challenges we faced as a new council coming into this county after the corruption scandal, not to go to such extreme that we become a police state, but we really needed to balance this out. And there's times where I think it went too far, there's times when maybe it didn't go far enough, and I think we do need to go to this level and have it in our charter. But at the same time, I want to make sure that this office doesn't become out of balance and out of control like a Ken Starr's office. But what all this substitute does, similar to that of the sheriff substitute that I proposed, is to change the number of council people from 8 to 6 who, the number we need to have the IG removed. And that helps strike a balance of having this office and not having it as this separate entity that is in and of itself potentially can get out of control. So I would ask my colleagues to support the substitute simply to change that supermajority number of 8 to remove the IG to a number 6. And I think that would be fair, and that would help us strike a balance in having this office in the charter.
Okay, very good. Any discussion on Ms. Simon's comments? Mr. Sharon?
Thank you. At least if I understand from Ms. Simon, she's in favor of the concept with the exception of just wanting to change the numbers. Is that correct? Okay. I'm in favor of the concept under either proposal, but I do believe that the 8 sends a statement of the importance of this, because what will happen mechanically is that if there's been a recommendation and an elimination of the position by the county executive, it would then come to this council and be discussed in an executive session as personnel matter, a protected item to be going before in an executive session matter. Is that correct?
Yeah, it depends on how you have it in the charter. The way that this is drafted, it's drafted as a personnel matter.
Right.
There are other examples like the PRC where you're
I understand, but this particular one
is an executive. Yeah.
I don't mean to, but this particular one is a personnel matter, so it would come before this body in an executive session where we would be discussing the ramifications. The county executive would lay out those, and then we would come out in a public session and take the vote as to whether or not this person would go forward. And I think it makes a strong statement whether the person, because a simple majority either way could retain it, that person or eliminate. This way, it would take 8 votes to say that this person should not be going forward. We will have heard what went on in executive session. We'll come out in a public session, and we'll make a strong statement that says that. And so I believe that is and that's the position I'm going to be supporting.
Can I move, Mr. Chair, to adopt the substitute? I'm going to make that motion.
Yes.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to adopt the substitute for Resolution 2014-0163.
To Ms. Simon, the 6 versus 8 is the only change. I just wanted to make sure.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. No further questions? No further comments? Okay, so before us is the substitute sponsored by Ms. Simon, Resolution 2014-0163. We'll do a roll call vote.
Ms. Simon?
Yes.
Ms. Conley?
Yes.
Mr. Greenspan?
Yes.
Mr. Miller? Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Germana? Mr. Gallagher? Mr. Schron?
No.
Ms. Conwell? Mr. Jones?
Yes.
Mr. Hairston? Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. So the substitute before us is the now moving legislation. Is there any discussion on the current legislation before us?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Miller?
I'd like to move a technical amendment in both versions, so we'll work with the substitute since we substituted. There's an error in the numbering. In section 1401 proposed, you have 1 powers and duties, 2 qualifications, and then 2 appointment and term. So I'm just moving that appointment and term be 3, removal be 4, and vacancy be 5, so that the numbering's correct.
Okay, so is that a motion?
That's a motion.
I'll second. Any discussion on the motion? We'll do a voice vote on this technical amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that amendment carries. I do have a question as I'm looking at the numbering to the law director. This section 1401, that's listed under section 1 as to where this be placed in the charter. If this item and the previous item on the voting rights, am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
Are both adopted, they both have the same number. How would that be altered?
There is a provision in the charter that allows the clerk of council, with the approval of the law director and the council, to do the clerical and
Okay.
renumbering of the charter. So that's how we would do it. On a going forward basis, I think the best thing is not to actually put the numbers in the amendment itself, and then we would number it afterwards, but this is fine.
Okay.
We can.
Okay, very good, thank you. Any further discussion on this item? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Clerk, please call the roll.
I think we need a motion and a second to move it to the full council.
Okay. Ms. Simon, if you'd like to make the motion on your amendment as your substitute is the prevailing legislation?
Move that this, referring to the full council for second reading.
Very good, and that would be on the July 22nd, tonight's meeting. That was seconded by Mr. Hairston. Very good, motion's been made by Ms. Simon, seconded by Mr. Hairston. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, will the clerk? Yeah,
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Jermaine.
I do have a question. And, since, this is new and we're still perfecting this, by passing this in the form that we are today, council still can change by ordinance or resolution different aspects of who the Inspector General reports to and so on. The only reason I say that is, we're with one county executive now, and in the future, the idea of possibly having the Inspector General report to the sheriff, and I'm not suggesting that we change that now, but a council in the future. So.
The way that the amendment is drafted is it creates the office, and so it institutes the office and gives that office the power to be the chief ethics officer of the county. But then it gives council the ability to establish the powers and duties of that office. If you're talking about putting it under the sheriff, remember one of the amendments that we were trying to add under the sheriff is by ordinance to be able to add, because and the way we've gotten around it before is giving powers to the sheriff's department instead of the sheriff, the person. But then you're talking about a different constitutional officer having specified powers and changing those. You would probably need charter amendments if that's specifically what you have in mind, because you're affecting not just the powers of the Inspector General, you're affecting the powers of another officer whose powers are defined in the charter. So it becomes more complex, but generally in terms of the powers and duties of the Inspector General, you could do that by ordinance. That's what this amendment does.
Yeah, the only reason I bring that up, well, you answered my question. You know, there is some that have a feeling that the Inspector General should really be independent, even to the executive, so, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question about the qualifications, 14.01, number 2. It says the Inspector General shall have at least 10 years' experience as an Inspector General, accountant, auditor, attorney. Who are we going to find who fits that qualification? Am I reading that wrong?
They're not, obviously, it's not 10 years in each one, in each discipline. It's a cumulative experience.
But it says that. It says that this person has to have 10 years, at least 10 years' experience as an Inspector General,
Or,
including but not limited to at least one of these qualifications, because this says all of those.
if the third line down, it says the word "or" is inserted. So the intent of the word "or" would be Inspector General or Certified Accountant or Internal Auditor or Licensed.
Need to make that a little, pardon me?
Another reason I'm voting no.
We can work on, actually, the issue that the more I read it, the issue that it's not necessarily that you have to have 10 years on all of them, but the question is whether you can have a combination of those, like, so 2 years this and 2 years that. So what we'll do is we'll work on language in the law department. We'll have it for you for the next meeting. Obviously, the intent is, as I understand it from council, is as long as you have a combined 10-year experience, any of these, it doesn't have to be 10 years in one of them. It could be 2 years in one of them, 3 years in the other. The cumulative is 10 years. We can.
Yeah, Mr. Law Director, I know what the intent is, but this isn't what this says, and I don't think,
No.
I guess the president could vote for this, because we'll never find probably anybody who's going to fit this qualification, so.
And actually, when I used the term intent, I was making sure that that's the intent that council wants, so that we draft the amendment that way. I wasn't trying to say what the intent is.
Mr. Chair, I'd just like to reiterate, this is a work in progress. We have an Inspector General. The Inspector General is operating. We need to work out the details. We don't have to, there's no crunch to do this year. There's a lot of details that we have to work out. I keep repeating, we're spending $1 million a year on this office. Let's give it some time and make sure we got it right before you put it in the charter.
The one thing I would point out is even county officers in the charter, the law director has 5 years experience. In other places, it's usually 5 years. I don't think we have 10 years anywhere else in the charter. It is an awfully long time period, but.
Well, maybe I'm going to vote this to the full hearing, but is there time to amend this? Obviously, again, if we want to make it 5 years. And my concern isn't not the duration necessarily, is equally that how this runs together. It looks like this person has to have experience in all of these fields, and I don't think this is the author's intent, is it? Mr. Chair?
And I don't have the ordinance in front of me, but I believe the ordinance language is this language, correct? The ordinance that we currently have adopted for the Inspector General, I believe uses. It's the same requirements, the language is a little modified. Okay, so if the intent, I think we're all clear, the intent is not to have 10 years in each discipline, but to have a cumulative experience of 10 years across multiple disciplines. If the law director with Mr. King can craft the language between now and August 12th, which will be the third reading, then we can introduce an amendment at that time to modify the language, be consistent with the intent.
You, Mr. Chair, one last thing for council to consider. There's no place in here that gives us the opportunity to remove the Inspector General.
No, that's correct.
Maybe that's something we should think about between now and the next time.
All right, very good. Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. This would be on Resolution 2014-0163. Motion was made and seconded for second reading for tonight's meeting of July 22nd. Clerk, please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Ms. Simon?
Yes.
Ms. Conley?
No.
Mr. Greenspan?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mr. Germana?
Yes?
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes, to move forward.
Mr. Schron?
Yes.
Ms. Conwell? Mr. Jones?
Vote yes to move forward.
Mr. Hairston?
Yes, to move forward.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes my portion of the agenda. I'll move back to the right, and the president can move to the left.
You might share that.
Thank you.
Now that you got her angry.
History will prove me right.
Feels better.
Earl Warren said that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, you've been waiting very patiently. You've seen democracy in action. And I know there are a number of people here that want to speak. And I just had a couple of very brief comments. This whole idea about this demolition project came to the attention of individual members of council, earlier this year, and we were in the process of getting information and reading, and volumes of paper were given to us, and you were kind of reading and talking to various people about the concept. And then Mr. Fitzgerald made the announcement before we had really, I felt, an opportunity to get all the information. So we are here today to hear from all of you. Our initial question is do we have the bonding capacity? There are a lot of things that have to be done in the county, and we want to make sure that we have the money to do this before we go out and do it. And then we've got to work out the details. So I really appreciate all of you coming here to give us your information, because we want to make sure that if this project is a go, if we have the money, that the project is administered fairly and equally, so that everyone in the county has an opportunity to take advantage of it. So, Madam Clerk, would you call on those persons who have signed in? We have a number of elected officials here today. I won't call all of you, but I really appreciate all of you coming in today.
Starting with Joel Ratner.
And you have 3 minutes, and we've got 2 hours before our meeting, so we're kind of try and hold you close and to the 3 minutes. And everybody says finish your sentence, but as I said at our last meeting, everybody has these Faulkner sentences that go on for 2 paragraphs or something. So we're going to kind of cut you out when you get close to your 3 minutes, but you can finish your concept.
Thank you. I'll speak quickly. Thank you very much, Madam President and council members, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Joel Ratner. I'm the president and CEO of Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. We're a community development intermediary in Cleveland, and we work to foster neighborhoods of opportunity and choice throughout Cleveland. Today, I'm here to comment on the agenda as it relates to establishing a Cuyahoga County property demolition bond. And we want to make it very clear that we support the efforts to do that, and that would provide our cities the resources to stabilize and revitalize neighborhoods. Funding for demolition is critical, and we support it. And as the council develops this fund, we want to emphasize the need for a strategic and comprehensive approach to reach the ultimate goal of stabilizing and increasing property values in Cleveland and the entire county. We see demolition as one part of a three-legged stool to neighborhood revitalization. The others are housing rehab in markets where there's demand, and vacant land reuse to bring unproductive parcels back to life. The reality is that housing rehab is not easy. I'll be the first to admit that when we have scarce resources and that vacancy and blight are a problem. But despite these challenges, we know there are innovative practices to do rehab in a smart and strategic and targeted way. And the Slavic Village Recovery Project is a great example. In an area hard hit by the foreclosure crisis, a private philanthropic model emerged to acquire 200 properties in a targeted area for demolition, greening, and rehab to create demand for affordable housing. And while the project is still new, we see signs that it's actually succeeding in stabilizing and increasing property values. In that project, homes are typically rehabbed and sold for a profit that's reinvested back into the project. And while the average amount spent on rehab is more than the $10,000 it costs to demolish a house, we believe that if $10,000 is added into rehab as last dollars, that it could push more houses out of the demolition category and into the rehab category, thereby maintaining them on the tax rolls. While demolishing a blighted property is an important first step, we're still left with a vacant lot, which, if not properly maintained, creates further drain. We've been part of Reimagining Cleveland, which is a creative program to green neighborhoods and specific lots in the city of Cleveland. It's a cross-sector collaboration that uses creative strategies to bring vacant parcels back to life. And we've done over 300 vacant lots in the city of Cleveland, turning them into gardens, parks, and expanded side yards through the Reimagining program. With support, an effort like this could be scaled across the county to assist in neighborhood redevelopment and revitalization efforts. Is that the bell?
That's it,
That
you're
was
done.
a different bell. Okay, thank you very much for
And
the
I just wanted to say
opportunity.
that Ms. Conwell and I had an opportunity to visit former St. Luke's Hospital, where Mr. Ratner holds forth, and I was really, really impressed. I've been telling everybody how wonderful your apartments are, and you really did a fantastic job.
Thank you
So
very much.
Congratulate you on that.
Thank you. You're all invited to come and see it.
I would
Thank you.
urge all of you to really go, because that really was a massive project, and it's wonderful.
Thank you. We're very proud of it.
And I think, Mr. Germana really wants to come because he was born there.
Thank you. Many of us were, many East Siders.
Yes, Ms. Conwell.
I was at St. Luke's Foundation again today, meeting with Thriving Community, and they would also like to do a presentation showing the different data and the way the structures are that they could help in this project and moving forward.
Okay. I will look forward to that. Okay, thank you. Next victim.
Next is Kathleen Crowther.
Good afternoon. I'm president of the Cleveland Restoration Society, and it is our pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you today. Our organization is a partner of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Our mission is to help people preserve Greater Cleveland's heritage resources through education and advocacy, awards and special events, technical assistance, and financial assistance. In Cleveland, its first-ring suburbs, and even further afield in this county, we have a tremendous legacy of history and architecture. We are a great melting pot of cultures that are represented in our built environment. As a cultural preservation organization, we see the value and opportunity in these unique places, even if they are deteriorated and underappreciated. We prefer to emphasize the positive, the potential beauty and meaning of good places. And there are many Clevelanders and suburbanites who agree with this viewpoint. The Heritage Home Program, which is our rehabilitation program for 1, 2, and 3 family homes, was started in 2 Cleveland neighborhoods and has grown into a program that operates in 36 cities and villages in Cuyahoga County. We offer free technical assistance to homeowners who ask for it in our participating cities and villages. Last year, we helped over 1,200 homeowners. And since we started doing this, we've helped over 6,500 homeowners with projects valued at over $138 million. Through the involvement of Cuyahoga County, you are our partner in this, I hope you know that, and others, such as the Ohio Housing Finance Agency, the State Treasurer, Key Bank, and First Federal of Lakewood, we've made over 1,000 loans at our current rate right now is 1.4%, 2% APR fixed. It is important for you to know that this activity, this rehabilitation, this hand-holding with individual property owners, get them into a loan to fix up their house, supports neighborhood property values and the sense of community. Cleveland State University has conducted 2 studies over the years on our program and has found the following, the 3rd page of my statement. Number 1, people who take out a heritage loan stay in their houses for a longer period of time. They sell less often, and this promotes neighborhood stability. Number 2, heritage loan properties appreciate more quickly than other similar properties. Number 3, the neighboring homes of heritage loan properties appreciate more quickly than other similar properties. And number 4, heritage loan properties have a foreclosure rate that is 1/5 of the rate of other houses in Cuyahoga County. It's for these reasons.
Okay, we can read the rest of it, okay?
Okay,
All right, thank you very much.
thank you.
Mayor Earl Lycan.
Welcome, Mayor Lycan.
Thank you. And I want to thank the County Council for seeking to create this fund. I'm here representing not just Shaker Heights, but primarily the First Suburbs Consortium, a group of 19 communities that are entering suburbs of Greater Cleveland. And what we're asking for is flexibility in the creation of the program in two respects. First, that you do not create rigid restrictions that prohibit any of our first suburb communities from applying for funds as a result of this program, such as criteria based on median income or historic redistricting or foreclosure rates. I just want to make it clear how critical an impact the foreclosure problem has had on the first suburbs. We've had 40,000 residential foreclosure filings between 2006 and 2012. In 2012, our residential foreclosure filings eclipsed that in Cleveland. We have an average vacancy rate of 11%, and 30% of our properties have sold for under $25,000 at sheriff's sales. Many of us are non-entitlement communities, and we very much need the help through the county. We have no other sources to go to. Secondly, I think it's very important that the program have flexibility and that we not be limited to using the funds strictly for demolitions or strictly in accordance with some formula that's established by the county that does not allow for creativity and flexibility and taking advantage of the understanding that our communities have of how the funds can be best used and where they can be most effective. And just to give an example from Shaker Heights, in our most distressed neighborhood, we used a combination of programs to deal with the problem and prevent the free fall of property values. That included demolishing dozens of our most blighted properties, but at the same time, we also renovated a number of properties. We rehabbed a number of properties. We partnered with NHS and the county in turning vacant lots into community parks. And we also created 9 units of affordable rental housing for entrepreneurs, which allowed us to really be successful in allowing this neighborhood to be much more viable than it would have been otherwise. So we'd ask for flexibility in allowing our first suburb communities to access the funds and flexibility in allowing us, when we apply, to be able to use the funds. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you time that perfectly, or?
Next is Councilman Tony Brancatelli.
Thank you, council members, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And on behalf of Council President Kelly, who couldn't stay, he wants to pass along his support for this county bond and wants to state how important that $50 million will be to our region. Certainly, as a board member of Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, a long-standing member of the Landmarks Committee, a board member of CCDC, council member of City of Cleveland in Ward 12, chairman of Community Development, Economic Development, Planning and Sustainability Committee, and resident of the neighborhood that at one time had the highest foreclosure rate in the entire United States. And also a Kiwanian, but not an Elk. They wouldn't have me. But I was born in St. Luke, so I know you're thinking I'm way too young for that. I just want to talk about that in the past meetings, you've heard quite well the interest that we've had in demolition and also the demand that we've had. Between our director, Ripka, as well as Frank Ford, they've outlined the thousands and thousands of distressed properties that are out there that really need to come down to help save our neighborhoods. We do have lots of options out there. We have an urban forestry department. We have a county land bank that their demolitions leave that site as great as a putting green. We know how to fix up houses. Over the last 8 years in the Jackson administration, we've rehabbed or built new nearly 5,000 units of housing throughout Cleveland. We know that demo is not the silver bullet. We want to be clear that that's not our only mission, our only statement today, but these funds are critical. We know that there's a dialogue going on now that really puts a demand on us that really exceeds what we're even putting on the table today. But let's be clear, we cannot rehab, we cannot build new, we cannot restore confidence in our residents from fleeing our neighborhoods if we're not removing these blighted conditions. We know that demolition will stabilize property values. We know that demolition will lower foreclosure rates. We know that demolition will reduce crime and stabilize social unrest in our communities. We are blessed with one of the best county land banks in the entire United States. I've been to many conferences around many states, and our county land bank is one of the best around. Invest in this $50 million for demolition will help stabilize our property value, stabilize our confidence, and give us that other track that can go on, which is rehabbing housing, providing green space, and doing neighborhood development at a level that we can sustain again in the future. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Brancatelli. Next.
Jerry Durant.
Hi, Jerry Durante. I came to represent Cotw Improvement today and speak about the need in that neighborhood of burned out buildings, burned out homes that have languished for years. But, you know, hearing about the idea of using some of this money for renovation, I just want to state a concern that we would be possibly replicating what the federal government did a few years ago, which was investing with stimulus money, hundreds of thousands of dollars in houses that were then put back on the market, which eliminated the sales of existing homes because these were always the first and most desirable homes. The problem is you are then creating a situation where you are frustrating sellers, perpetuating abandonments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Durant.
Frank Ford.
Thank you. Council invited me here about a month ago to give a presentation on research, the state of the conditions that we're facing with foreclosure and abandonment. And I just wanted to update some information that came to my attention really just this morning. Thriving Communities Institute just completed a survey in East Cleveland, a door-to-door survey. Now, you may recall when I presented to you a month ago, I said we had a pretty good idea of what the demolition cost in the city of Cleveland would be. 8,300 vacant homes has been counted by the city. The suburbs have not counted, so we knew the 8,300 translates to 83 million. But now we have a number for East Cleveland for the first time. It's 1,033 properties that are deemed to be demolishable, and that's the way it's currently written in the draft narrative. That's out of 1,300 vacant, 1,033 are deemed to be demolishable. That's at minimum adding another 10 million to the 83 million. But consider that some of those, if any of you who've driven through East Cleveland, you know that some of those are apartment buildings. They're not going to be 10,000. So, but I think the starting point is we're at least able to document a higher number than I even presented last time. It's probably 93 million, upwards to 100 million. And I just wanted to leave you with that as an update on the information I presented. I think the only other thing I want to say is, I think everybody in this room is in favor of renovation and a comprehensive approach. I don't know anybody who isn't. Those who are in favor of demolition, I think we're looking at it as, it's a medical analogy. It's the body has cancer cells. And you could do the cancer cells, and you could do the comprehensive approach and treat the arthritis and a bunch of other things. You've got limited money. If you don't treat the cancer cells, the body's gonna die. You've got to deal with, as Tony Brancatelli said, you've got to deal with these vacant properties, as many as you can. And think about that. If you want to spend money on other things, it's attractive, but until we remove the blight and bring property values back up, we're not going to be able to get back to where we can have a healthy market that can do renovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much,
Sure.
Mr. Forth. And finally?
Councilman Zach Reed.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm always intrigued with individuals who step to the microphone and tell you that this is the way we should do it as it relates to demolition, but if you listen to the name, it says point blank demolition bond. So the words clearly tell you what direction, if you give them the money, they will go in. They will continue to go through our wards and our communities in the city of Cleveland, predominantly in the African American community, tearing down houses and leaving those neighborhoods with high grass and high weeds, and laying it on the city of Cleveland to be the official landscapers for those communities, simply because there's no one else to cut the grass after they've torn the house down and given those vacant properties to the city of Cleveland. The example to me would be 144th Street, and it's good that we have our assistant director here. 144th Street is clearly the worst street in the neighborhood that I have the opportunity to represent. We've already torn down 25 houses on that street. I repeat, on one street, on one neighborhood, 25 houses have been demolished. Our director, Ripka, went at my behest to look at the houses in one particular area, and he came back and said, Councilman, we tore down 4 of those 5 houses because that 5th house, I believe, could be saved because of the brick house. That brick house stands today because there's no money to rehab the house. So therein lies the problem when you hear these people step forward and say, we're with you, they don't give you the money. So we tore the other houses down, we left it there, but nowhere did he come back and say, here's the additional funding to rehab that house on that street. So 2 weeks ago, a young lady comes to me and said, Councilman, I like what you've done on 144th Street, but I had to move because I couldn't continue to wait for it to happen. And then when they step to you and talk about East Cleveland and talk about the situation of tearing down versus rehabbing, they never come to you to tell you about the jobs that will be created if we rehab. If we rehab these houses, we create jobs because we need roofers, we need electricians, we need plumbers. What's going to get, when you hear them talk about the crime, you know what helps people come out of crime? Their jobs. So tearing down homes and leaving vacant houses in our communities, vacant houses and vacant lots don't buy bread at the neighborhood store. They don't buy gas at their neighborhood gas station. People do. So if you would give us the flexibility that we're asking for, we're not going to live in some fool's paradise to believe that we're going to have to only demo, and rehab. We believe there's a flexibility here. And by allowing us the flexibility, we can make the decision, should we demo that house or rehab that house? But a house that gets demoed, we want the $15,000 to rehab that house. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, if there's no other comments, then I'm going to call on Mr. Frangos. I believe you're the one that's going to make the presentation? Okay, Mr. Frangos.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the council, members of the administration. Thank you for permitting us from the Land Bank to speak to you regarding this important legislation. I do have more than 3 minutes, correct?
Yeah, you got more than 3 minutes.
Oh, okay. Well, in that case, if I can, first let me...
You don't have 3 hours, but you got 3 minutes. Yeah, you got more than 3 minutes.
10 minutes or 12, maybe.
That's good.
Very quickly, I'd like to introduce my competent staff, which helps us to be the good land bank that you have all helped us to become. As Mr. Brancatelli said, Mr. Bill Whitney, 30, 40 years of institutional knowledge in CDC world, Bill. And then Ms. Nettle, Jackie Nettle, she's my executive assistant. Michael Schramm, who's the preeminent research person throughout the country, and that's not hyperbole. Ms. Cheryl Stevens, who's acquisition and development director, indeed, worthy of the clap. And Mr. Roberts, who is also the director of our program officer. Ms. Vitrisha Naimba, she is also our compliance person and assistant manager in special programs. On February 19th, 2014, Cuyahoga County Executive Ed Fitzgerald announced that his administration would seek approval of a countywide bond program to fund urgently needed demolition of vacant, abandoned, and blighted properties in Cuyahoga County. The executive acknowledged that the proliferation of blight in the aftermath of the foreclosure crisis of the 2000s had a profoundly negative impact on property values, the tax base,
and investment and further constituted an urgent health and safety risk requiring prompt and substantial intervention. In the aftermath of the real estate and foreclosure crisis post-2007, Cuyahoga County was hit with an estimated 25 to 30,000 vacant and abandoned blighted properties. These consist of everything from single-family homes and multi-family apartments to commercial and industrial buildings. These numbers derive from both anecdotal as well as verified data, consisting of condemnation lists from Cleveland and other inner-ring suburbs, vacant property surveys by CDCs and cities, tax foreclosure data, and U.S. Postal Service records on vacancies. Vacant and abandoned properties are not merely an inner city problem. They infect the inner ring, and sadly, even the outer ring suburbs are now experiencing the effects. Several studies establish that the pervasive vacant and abandoned properties promote decaying property values and encourage additional foreclosures by a statistically significant factor. That's something that I think you heard testimony about from Mr. Ford at a previous hearing. These studies, without getting into them, they're all referenced in your packet. There's an index of those. Left unabated, continued property value decay and increased foreclosures exacerbate and simply fuel the cycle of vacant and abandoned properties. And these findings, as you heard from Mayor Lyken, they're consistent with budgetary and human resource costs attested to by the county administration. You all know this yourself. You've been hearing it for years. Mayors, city council members, building and housing officials, police, fire, and other law enforcement officials who attest to the same thing. Vacant and abandoned properties are venues for drug, violent criminal activity, arson and fire damage, safety risk to police and firefighters, a strain on personnel resources of housing code enforcement officials, housing court personnel, and come with an extensive nuisance abatement cost to the community. So it's not just bad properties. They're certainly bad properties, and they're not things that we just want to take down. People get killed in these, neighborhoods are terrorized by these. It's just the reality of it. There's no way to sugarcoat that. So the policy intervention and policy impact. Based on the number of vacant and abandoned properties countywide, residential structures needing demolition reflect an admittedly huge gross cost. And of course, the plague of vacant and abandoned properties is contagious. As these properties dot a neighborhood, the likelihood that other properties will fall prey to the same condition is increased. It's just common sense. Nobody wants to live next to these properties, so the properties that people don't live next to continue to just decay. However, and more optimistically, the cited studies also show a more positive concept, and that is that removing vacant and abandoned properties improves neighborhoods and market stability. Investment in market value stabilization They occur when blight is removed. The Cuyahoga Land Bank and the administration agree that concentrating demolition efforts within specific geographies and neighborhood typologies over a condensed time frame, kind of like removing the cancer that was recently mentioned, will mitigate the anticipated future costs associated with demolition. And to illustrate, for example, if the gross universe of properties needing demolition was, say, 1,000, we know it's much more, but say it's 1,000. If we sluggardly take down 50 over a long and drawn-out period of time, all as we will get is another 50 on the market because we're not jump-starting the market in those areas. And we're essentially just triaging and managing the chaos. However, using that same example, if you have 1,000 properties and you surgically and you quickly and over a condensed period of time knock out 500 of those property, the remaining 500 will not need to be demolished. Maybe 100 of those will need to be demolished. Maybe 150 of those will be demolished. And you end up saving more, you end up demolishing less. In order to just avoid continuing the triaging, we want to go beyond that. And this is because concentrated intervention, as I've described, it provokes market-based intervention. Again, it's just common sense. This is a classic example how community development activity where there's little or no market becomes the needed catalytic predicate for economic development and market-based activity. Accordingly, based on the discussions that we have been having with community members, elected officials, neighborhood activists, neighborhood advocates, the administration, Mr. Kelly and his team and others, we believe that the program focus indeed needs to be an aggressive threshold of blight elimination as an overriding objective over a shortened period of time. And you'll hear me say that again. The executive's $50 million provides just that kind of threshold critical mass, and it'll have impact because of it. The focus on demolition as the highest, best, and most impactful use of demolition funds could not come at a better time because these funds will be deployed alongside of the hardest hit funds, which were just authorized by the United States Treasury Department, and also the county land bank's continued annual funding and work that we do through the kind support of this council. This type of concentration will take us beyond merely managing the hemorrhaging, and instead it will promote neighborhood stabilization and growth. And what about renovation? You've heard that said here, and you've heard it talked about compellingly. And I think you will not get any argument from the Cuyahoga Land Bank or from advocates in the community development field. Renovation is an integral part of community development, generally speaking. However, the concentrated demolition emphasis concentrated by this legislation, in our humble opinion, respectfully, should not be diluted. And that's what will happen if we go into all different directions and start trying to create programs that sort of answer to everybody's concept. Instead, demolition is intended to complement the renovation. You heard it from Councilman Brancatelli. You clear out blight, you clear out cancer, and then people will be willing to invest. The converse is not necessarily true. You can spend $1 million of stimulus money on a property that's sitting in a neighborhood, but if it's got junk, vacant and abandoned properties next to it, nothing will happen. Nobody in the market will react to that. All you've done is to spend a bunch of money to fix a house and have done nothing to catalyze that neighborhood, in my humble opinion. We need to create market activity, and the Cuyahoga Land Bank's experience attests to this complementary effect. I have come before this body on previous occasions, and I can give you more accurate information now, the Land Bank's activity. Through nearly 5 years of existence, the Cuyahoga Land Bank has successfully facilitated the renovation of nearly 900 homes through its popular deed and escrow program and various other programs that are embedded within our operation. Almost all of this was market-based activity using private money. This represents roughly $18 million of commercial activity, of value-based activity. 900 homes, $20,000, $30,000 per spec when we write it up. And those homes, when they get back on the market, that's the equivalent value of what's being done in the community. All of this has resulted in these properties being placed back on the market and paying taxes again. A study commissioned by the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard University, undertaken by a research team including faculty from Case Western Reserve University, acknowledged that this realistic housing programs, this is more realistic when coupled with targeted demolition. That is the most appropriate way to work on to catalyzing a market and neighborhood activity in the environment that we find ourselves in. The program participation, I think it was mentioned by Mayor Liken that there's a need to be flexible, and we, of course, would support that kind of concept. We understand that program details are still being worked out. However, in collaboration with the County Development Department, some discussions include the following concepts which we would support. To participate in the program, for example, an eligible city applicant would complete and submit a request for an allocation of funds to the County Development Department, and this application would be both specific but yet flexible. Generally, the application will allocate, the application will identify specific eligible properties to be demolished. It'll demonstrate how demolishing identified properties will meet program requirements, and it'll designate the applicant or the Cuyahoga Land Bank to carry out the demolitions and provide reports and the reporting requirements to the Development Department. Each request should define property typologies areas where property values will be stabilized by demolitions. Local communities know best what their respective priorities are. As Mayor Lycan had said, we want to be flexible. I don't know, somebody in one city doesn't necessarily know the priorities and activities in another city. So cities, they are indeed the appropriate ones to identify and focus their priorities. For example, property-specific characteristics would include condemned and condemnable properties, open, vacant, and vandalized properties, tax foreclosure eligibility, are all factors. Geographical or typology considerations would include public safety, institutional proximity, schools, where do kids walk? You want to focus on these areas' activity, and these are things that cities can flexibly submit to the development department. As long as they have some strategy of that nature, it would meet program requirements in our estimation. Places of worship, recreation centers, retail concentrations, and of course land assemblages. Those are all the kinds of things that I think that are easily able to be placed in some kind of program. And the reason I emphasize that is because the research of property characteristics, geographies, typologies, and trajectories on a real-time basis, and I emphasize a real-time basis, is essential to program effectiveness. Utilizing NeoCanDo, which merges all of the county databases as well as other databases, together with the county land bank's elevated research capabilities, the county will be most able to efficiently identify the relevant property characteristics, work with our cities to overlay neighborhood filtering, information useful for development assemblages. We already work closely with the county in this research activity and will provide a cost savings to our partner municipalities. And happily, and in conclusion, we understand that granular details such as mechanics, drawdown of funds, timeframes, program documentation, these are all matters that will ultimately be prescribed and approved by all of you and the administration when you put a program together. However, in summary, we feel the highest, the best, and most impactful use of program funds will provide funding sufficient to eliminate a meaningful threshold. We can't just divvy this money up in a way that doesn't have a provable impact in the county. So we would suggest a meaningful threshold of vacant and abandoned blighted properties throughout the county on the flexible strategic basis that I've described, and a program that would promote market activity and increase property values over a short period of time than rather over decades. Kind of the 50 properties in a sluggardly way that just basically keeps our heads above water, treading water. We don't want to do that with this money. The Cuyahoga Land Bank has the established skills, the technology, and staff to implement the program, should this council approve that. And we would therefore energize and be able to deploy these funds because of the research capabilities and our assistance to partner cities with that kind of research and information. And of course, we are charged to do just that in our plan. Our CIC plan with the county has charged us to do that, just that kind of work. So with that, I thank you for allowing me to present. Thank you for your support for the land bank, and if you have questions, I remain prepared to answer them.
Mr. Frangos, I thank you for your presentation. I know there are a lot of questions, but I think it might be in the best interest to have the three presenters present their information, then we'll, everybody can keep their questions, and then we'll come back for questions.
Very good. Thank you.
And is Mr. Kelly next?
Thank you, Madam President. I was prepared to speak for less than 3 minutes. So I'm going to have to filibuster a little bit. I thought that'd be funnier than it was. Let me try it a different way.
That went over like a lead
I'm happy
balloon.
to stick to just 3 minutes. So we've already had the benefit of hearing from Gus Frangos and a number of our colleagues in community development and economic development. So I'm not going to repeat the need for demolition at the county level. When the county executive proposed it, a lot of these arguments that we've already covered today have been repeated then and since. And so I want to talk about one particular question, maybe two, and then leave the rest of your time for questions. The first is, why us? Why is this a county problem? And drawing from what we've heard from Frank Ford and from our city leaders and community development leaders, We see it in the neighborhood level, but we also see it county-wide. Every community in Cuyahoga County is impacted, albeit differently, by vacant and abandoned structures. So the program that we endeavor to produce for the county will address areas of concentrated blight and do that swiftly, but also to be able to provide enough resources for those properties which would be considered spot blight. Those areas in our county where you might have a property that is of challenged ownership, vacant, abandoned, and blighted, and the locality does not have the resources to address that issue and prepare it for development. We heard from other studies about the fiscal impact. We hear about property values getting diminished because of the direct and indirect impact of vacant and abandoned properties. And so what we see is the burden of the tax burden and cost of government pushing out into other suburbs that may consider vacant abandoned property as not their problem. But that cost is being borne by some of those suburbs. Also, it allows us to lay the groundwork for redevelopment. I've had the pleasure of being here many times advocating for strengthening the downtown district and residential opportunities for downtown because of the trends that are moving towards the reurbanization of our country. As that pendulum is swinging back, as the interest in living closer to the city continues, we need to make sure that we're addressing blight, vacant and abandoned properties, and preparing those neighborhoods for redevelopment when it comes. Lastly, it is a county issue because there just aren't resources for demolition the way that there are for other tools. The stimulus funds provided many resources for rehabilitation and comparatively modest, sometimes none, depending on the program, for demolition. But for very active advocacy from our colleagues in community development and elected officials, we were able to secure a relatively modest amount of money for demolition activity. The council supports funding for the land bank, which is also a tool for demolition. But in each case, local resources are the resource for demolition. In contrast, you have private resources for rehabilitation and new construction. About $125 million was spent in rehab in Cuyahoga County in 2012. And those resources come from the private marketplace. We don't have anything to parallel that in terms of demolition because arguably we are taking away the very asset that the private marketplace would use to secure those loans. And so the last reason why demolition is Cuyahoga County's problem, the way that we would solve it through this demolition bond, is that we are still cleaning up others' mess. And as we're working to address that issue, it has to be a collaborative effort. And we have to work on behalf of our cities and other housing leaders to do that and then continue to put the appropriate structures in place so that we can collect any revenue or go after other folks that might be responsible for getting these properties into disrepair in the first place.
Mr. Kelly, does the administration have a specific plan? Because if they do, we'd like to see it.
Yes.
Well, it would be nice if you would share that with us. I mean, this is what all of us have been saying. I've had conversations with everyone on this council. We are in favor of, we understand the concept, but the devil's in the detail. And we've got to work out the details.
All right, well, I'll be glad to elaborate on that. Our proposal is very similar. It is what Gus had outlined for us in his presentation. To begin, it is to assemble the resources for $50 million in bond proceeds. We have to confirm that our plan is
do we have the money?
In eligible use of bond
Wait,
proceeds.
don't we say we have to get, do we have the money?
Yes.
We do have the money.
Yes.
All right.
Now, it is council that has asked
Just show us the money.
Has challenged that. But it is the county executive's assertion that we do have what we need to do $50 million in demolition. Now, we do have to work with our bond counsel to make sure that any program is an eligible use of bond proceeds, and so that is a limiting factor for the formalization of a program, that and funding. Here is how we endeavor to execute this plan. The first is that one fundamental premise is that Cuyahoga County will not be choosing which properties should be demolished and which ones should not. We propose a model where cities will apply to the county for funding for demolition. That application will be reviewed on a number of binary criteria. Those criteria would be consistent with an approach towards blight remediation and alleviation, would make sure that there is an agent that can actually execute the demolition, that there will be a fiscal impact and a neighborhood impact. We need to be able to see those things to make sure that we are being strategic. But the fundamental principle that it will be the cities and their agents applying for the funds will allow cities to do what is best for their cities, because there is a great diverse need in terms of what individual cities need, and also addresses some of the concerns that you heard in the earlier public comment, reflecting what Mayor Lykin said about flexibility and addressing the needs of individual communities without the red tape and other difficulties that we learned when we were administering funds from other sources, the stimulus funding and others, that really increased the cost of addressing the issue of vacant and abandoned properties. We also intend to throttle the funds so that applicants will be limited to a certain amount, not yet determined, about how much could be requested at a certain time. We do this so that there is an organic method of allowing us to evaluate the efficacy of the program and to amend the program to accommodate new eligibility criteria or new uses as we're seeing the effectiveness of the program. So that is the program as we would design it.
Okay, you said we have the money. Have you taken into consideration the request of Metro Hospital, which is like $500 million for their renovation? And then there's a request, there's talk about the Justice Center, which needs another $250 million or something. So, we don't have an endless pot here. My question is, do we have the money? Do we have the bonding capacity?
Well, I would direct the specifics of your question to our fiscal team about how we would afford those things, and then also reflect back to council to identify what are the priorities about when we would pursue some of those other proposals. And when
all
they would
these
be
are wonderful
considered for
proposals,
funding.
but if we don't have the money and the taxpayers are not going to give it to us, and we don't have it, we got a problem here. So I just want to reiterate, folks, that this is a wonderful idea. We're all in support, but we got to make sure we got the money. And then there's two parts to this. We got to have the money, and then we got to have the details. And that's what we'll be working on. All of us, I think that's probably the consensus of all of us that I've talked to, that's what we're going to be working on. So I'm going to turn this over to questions, and Ms. Simon, and we'll. No, I think there was another presentation. Just the two. I thought it was three too.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Okay. Simon and other people have comments.
Come me down.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, thank you, everybody who came up to speak. I want the council to know that we do need a housing plan and we do need a demo plan. They're two separate kinds of plans. So I have met with Glenn Coyne of the Planning Commission and Councilman Miller and some other housing proponents of this idea to come together to actually construct a housing plan which will help strategize where the demo and or rehab would occur. And several questions that we're looking at is the demographic trends, where would demo make sense, where is it connected, how is it connected, and how can it facilitate redevelopment of mostly houses, but also commercial buildings. So that's going to be brought to the Planning Commission, which will be able to amass the data that's out there. We have data from Cotw, from the county, from the land bank, from CSU. We have data that's there. We just need to pull it together, and I think the ideal place to do that would be at the Planning Commission. So that's going to be happening, and I'll keep council apprised of that. I support this wholeheartedly. I don't think we can afford not to do this. It's affecting these abandoned, vacant, foreclosed homes are impacting every facet of our community. We've seen property values drop, and they're dropping primarily because of this, and exactly tangentially related to why we had to increase our health and human service levy. We can't afford not to do this. We have to do this. I think it's a burning priority. So I support a demo. I have a question about whether CDCs, and I can get an answer later, receive an administrative fee for rehab, and that can be answered later. So those are my comments. I'm fully in favor of demo. I think there's, as I think Nate Kelly said, private money available for rehab, but there's only public money available for demo. And this will be a drop in the bucket, and if we do it right and we do it strategically with the housing plan, I think this will help us increase the value of our property and move our county forward.
I think the value of this discussion is that many council people are kind of looking at different perspectives. So when we all come together, we'll have a really comprehensive picture. It's 5 minutes to 4. We have our regular meeting at 5 o'clock. So I can't put time limits on folks, but let's just, everybody, when you make your comments, kind of watch your time. Mr. Brady?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. We have been in this discussion publicly off and on, but certainly the discussion has been taking place across the community in different forums. Many organizations and individuals and activists have stepped forward and asked what we're doing, and given their suggestions about what we should be doing, and I know that's certainly going to continue. I have done. I've thought about this quite a bit since the executive proposed it, and of course, as you mentioned, Madam Chairperson, it was being discussed by councilpersons last year as well. The thing that I'm struck by is that we are all really, trying to salvage our community. We may look at it slightly differently, or think of different, or have different ways how it should be organized or how money should be dispersed, including the original test of whether we have the resources to begin with, which I recognize. But I think that the thing that strikes me the most, so I can be succinct here, is that we have developed through the land bank over the last many years, several years, in this community, almost uniquely in the country, not almost uniquely, really the expertise and that this kind of a community of this size would need to go forward. I think if this proposal were to have been made in a vacuum without the experience of the land bank for the last 4, 5, 6 years, that we would have a hard time understanding how to begin and where to go. But the fact is that a group of people have been assembled who do know this stuff, and they know it better than any of us do. It doesn't mean our questions aren't valid. Of course they are. It doesn't mean anybody else's proposals aren't valid. Of course they are. But we do have the best experts in the community, and maybe even in the country, an awful lot of them already working together in this community. I, for one, am going to listen very closely to what Mr. Frangos, having sat on the land bank myself, along with Nate Kelly, and I know Councilman Jones is now a representative on the land bank, for their guidance on this issue. And I think that we're just fortunate because, you know, we could have a discussion that would go on endlessly, but to be able to do something and do it in time to actually make a difference is only going to happen because we already have the expertise in place. We already have the organization in place. And that's where I start that's where I come from in the beginning of this discussion. And I hope that everybody will really give this some hard thought. It's a lot of money, and it's also, I think, critical to salvaging Cleveland and its housing stock. And this is actually, you know, about the minimal amount, I believe, that's been suggested is about the minimal amount we would need to make an impact. So I'm sure hoping we can afford it. Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you, Mr. Germana. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of.
I'll defer to Mr. Germana and go next.
Madam Chair, this would be a question to Mr. Frangus. We've heard, and I realize that the worst of the worst, I mean, they've been broken into, walls broken, there's just no rehabilitation, okay? So, I mean, it's more than cancer, it's spread throughout the carcass, so to speak. But I'm just wondering, we're not building anything, we're not accelerating anything, we're not being able to have a multiplier. Has there been any thought of grants of $10,000, which is the cost, because, you know, you demolish and it's gone. But if there's rehabilitation money available, and we used a $10,000 grant for somebody that's going to live there, and its location, the neighborhood is, how do you want to say, solid, stationary, can we start building neighborhoods faster by having some type of grant program where you get the grant of the $10,000 instead of destroying and having a vacant piece of land? Is this marketable where people will take that as a stimulus?
Madam Chairman, to Mr. Germana, I would suggest that arbitrary formulas that sound good and think that suggest that you would catalyze something by money would just cause something to occur out of nothing. The problem is not the $10,000 because, as I indicated, we have done just in our land bank, this doesn't include all the other programs, we have facilitated the renovation of 900 properties. The market is doing it. It's doing it without the $10,000. The problem is where you have a property that no matter how much you give it, $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000, when you fix that property, it's still only worth a small amount, either because of the market, and again, no one's going to spend that money because of the houses that you've said. There's some of them are just carcasses. So I mean, no amount of money, the $10,000, it would not be applicable to that example. A $10,000 would make no difference. It's been suggested to us, and we've even piloted that. And there are instances, particularly with our veterans programs, but the underlying property itself, when we spec it out, it comes in at an amount that's rationally related to what's going on in the market. It's, for example, when we spec it out, it's not a $90,000 rehab. $10,000 is not going to excite anybody about that home that needs $90,000 of rehab in an area where the neighborhood is tipping or it's difficult or the market is still not jump-started. I would suggest in answer to that that the $10,000 is not what will catalyze the neighborhood as you're seeking to that we all want. What will catalyze the market better is that if the blight, if the cancer is removed. If I'm a fresh, juicy apple, I don't want to sit next to a rotted apple. Take the rotted apple out, and you might get another fresh apple living next to it. It's not the $10,000. To me, I would suggest it's just an arbitrary formula that appeases people in saying that, well, give us a few dollars and we're able to do these miraculous things. The market is already doing the miraculous things if you just allow it to operate and you do the community development predicate to the economic development desire that we all have. That's a long-winded answer. That's my opinion, anyway, about that.
Okay, and then just my second question, and it was suggested to me last night privately. Somebody is sitting next to me in East Cleveland. The concept of dismantling houses, is there been any thought about having a program instead of just completely going in and deconstruction?
Deconstruction, has also been, something that's very much been discussed, as a possible workforce development program, recycling, eliminating all of the stuff that goes into a landfill. And so in principle, deconstruction is good. We've done it, but every model so far is a subsidized model. I've had people, probably a dozen that want to do deconstruction on our homes, but none of them have a business model that makes deconstruction work. In every case, it requires a subsidy. So whereas a demolition might cost $10,000, $12,000, if you deconstruct, you're at $12,000, $15,000, $17,000, give or take. And our only point is that, there is a way to do a deconstruction model that would involve a suitable business plan. And that is if you take a bulk volume of properties like ours and you tell that deconstructor, go out and cherry pick the ones that you want, sufficient to make your business plan to be not subsidized, but to just go on individual houses and say, I want to deconstruct this, to me is just, it sounds nice, but it's just a waste of money. You have to go in, pick the stuff out that's good, and have it fit a business plan that's profitable and that's sustainable. And the only way you can do that is bulk owners of properties like us. I've challenged every one of the deconstructors that have come in and wanted to do business with that. I've said, come into our inventory, have at it, give me your business plan, and we can rock and roll on that. And not a one of them has come back. So it's not that it's not a bad idea. It's just all of us would want it to fit a business plan that's sustainable, not subsidized forever and ever and ever. Yeah.
Mr. Miller?
Madam Chair to Chief Kelly, what's your concept of over how many years we might spend the $50 million?
I'm going to give you a number that hasn't been vetted, but a 3 to 4 year emphasis is my current target.
Okay, and to Mr. Frangos, can you give me an estimate on how much in hardest hit money we might receive in Cuyahoga County?
The hardest hit funds that I think we received or got allocated for was $10 million, roughly. Mr. Whitney, yeah, $10 million, which we have to expend, I think, over 2.5 years? 2 years. And unfortunately, it's very difficult money to spend. I won't bore you with that, but it's extremely difficult money to spend the way that they have set that program up. The one requirement of which is that we must own the property. You can't do nuisance demolitions like this pot of money would do. Nuisance demolitions meaning, you go and declare it a nuisance under your state police power, and you go in there and knock that property down, no matter who owns it. With the hardest hit funds, we have to have title to it. So we get them through tax foreclosure, Fannie Mae, HUD, and other REOs. But $10 million is the answer.
And Mr. Frangos, ballpark figure, about how much do you spend on an annual basis on demolition from the regular income you get from the stuff you get from the county prosecutor's office and the various things that have come in? What's the average annual spend?
Well, we have spent, I think in the last 2.5 years, the Attorney General's Moving Ohio Forward funds have been, we've matched those. So there was, I think, $11 million that we've got from the Attorney General. We matched it with another $11 million from the money you give us, plus what was given to us by the prosecutor a couple of years back. And so there's been roughly, $20 million spent there. And we front-end loaded the amount of money that you initially gave us when we first started by floating our own bond. So out of the $7 million that you give us, roughly $1.5 million of it gets applied to debt service. And that's going to go on till I think 2017. And then of course we have our normal salaries and field servicing and things of that sort. Field servicing, I mean, it's a costly, complex business. Field servicing, what I mean by that is, boarding the house up, cutting the lawn every 2 weeks, doing the demolition specs, antifreezing the toilet, all that stuff that you have to do when you hold that kind of inventory. Itself is probably $1.5 million annually, about $1.5 million annually. And again, there's no option. We have to do that, otherwise we'll be accused ourselves of being the worst slum landlord. So we have to be out there, and we make our mistakes. I think I had somebody from Councilwoman Conwell's ward calling us recently about something, but we jump on it when we're made aware of it. So all that is to say is that maybe $4 million when you add debt service and salaries.
Okay, so just ballpark figure, it sounds like if you add the 50 million plus the hardest hit plus what we're already doing on a regular basis, over 3 to 4 years we might be talking about an availability in the 75 million range. I'm just trying to think of that in terms of how it compares to the overall problem. And just a couple comments. I do support the planning process that Ms. Simon described. I do support focused demolition, but I think focused demolition needs to operate in the context of a broad understanding of the total environment that we're operating in, and that's where I think the planning process is important. And I think the fundamental aim is that we have leveraged impacts, that we improve neighborhoods and improve housing markets, and just don't have a temporary impact on a problem. And final comment is just that I do share the council president's concerns about bonding capacity, and we're going to have to take a very close look at that. Thank you.
Mr. Greenspan and Mr.
Okay, great, thank you. First of all, Mr. Kelly, I'm happy to hear that there's a plan. I'm not going to ask why it's been 5 months. We have not heard of it or seen it, but being the late hour it is today, if that plan could be transmitted to our clerk for dissemination to council by tomorrow morning, that would be very helpful so we can understand the administration's philosophy, vision, and implementation strategy. I would also hope, I recall from the State of the County address, the executive said that he had asked his staff to find the $50 million. I'd like to know, since we've had 5 months to understand more, you might not have that information, but you said the finance team might. I would assume that that's going to be included in this document, since we're now, as I said, 5 months past the announcement. So I look forward to reviewing that as well. The reason it's important to understand is council had asked a number of times, and we did finally receive a bond commitment report that summarizes the bonding requests that have been approved. This was not included in that, nor was the Economic Development Fund, and those combined collectively add to north of $170 million. And our Mr. Sprague, the financial advisor to the county, cautioned us that we may only have $150 million of bonding ability. So if the administration's position is to have council, as you said, set these priorities, that's great. We just need to understand what this plan is all about. I get the issue. I understand the concerns that this initiative will address. My I have my own concepts as to this plan, which we all do, and we'll vet them all out. You know, mine is not dissimilar to what you're saying insofar as communities would apply, but mine is in a loan environment, not a grant environment. And obviously, the loan repayment could be paid out of future realized property valuation increases through the sales tax roll, property tax rolls. The reason that it's important that we understand the bond mechanism and how the anticipation of this is to be funded is because in the first quarter financial reports, it was noted that property tax collections are on the decline, as are sales tax collections, by 0.6%. That's first quarter numbers. I'm curious to see second quarter to see if that trend is something we should be concerned about, or was a one-quarter blip. But the projection is a 2.5% increase in sales tax revenue. We saw a 0.6, on an annual rate, we saw a quarterly reduction of 0.6%. So there are a lot of considerations for council to mull over as we go through this process, and this will be a long, drawn-out process. I don't think you're hearing any negative comments about the concepts and merits of the program, but we don't know enough about what the administration's full vision is for this, only what we have heard in sound bites and heard at the State of the County address. So be interested to see tomorrow morning when we get this written plan, and I hope it does include $50 million, and we'll continue to convene and go through the process of consolidating council's strategy for this. And I appreciate the opportunity and the recognition that council have the availability to create the vision for this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greenspan.
Thank you, Madam President. Just so we can put it right on the record, what is the scope, the size of the problem? I'll tell you, here's Mr. Kelly, because you said you had, it's a big problem, so tell me how big the scope is. Then I'll hear Mr. Franco's.
The scope
give me the dollar
is getting
number.
more expensive as time goes on.
Give me a number.
I don't know. We think that 50
Bigger
million.
than 50 million or less than 50 million?
Probably more than 50 million, but the 50 million number, it is more than 50 million. But that 50 million number may be enough to catalyze the marketplace to catch up.
100 million? 200 million?
Well, the cost is compounding, not just in the cost of remediation, but also what is the cost, the opportunity cost.
But you're only in here talking about demo, at least as I understand it. So tell me the scope and the size of the demo.
I'm not going to take a guess at risk of being wrong.
But why did we take a guess that 50 million was right?
So 50 million, we know, is an affordable first step. We've also learned through
a first step to what? You only take a first step
to
towards
addressing
an end
vacant
goal.
abandoned property in Cuyahoga County. One of the things that we've observed through using demolition funds from external sources, non-public sources, is that the activity of demolition is difficult. And one of the challenges of having just 50 million is, do we have the means to use that 50 million in an efficient way without increasing the cost of demolition? Will we have enough in terms of labor force to effectuate that demolition? Because we saw when there was ample resources around for demolition at the beginning of stimulus funding, that those were some of the challenges. So 50 was a starting point for us to address the issue without going too far and being able to flooding the market in demolition.
Okay, well, as long as you're still, you said there was a plan, and you're going to have that over to Mr. Greenspan in the morning and to answer the council presidents. But I also wrote down that the county will not actually decide which properties. Some other method was going to be used to decide. Is that it? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, sir. That's our
Okay,
proposal.
so the county's not going to decide. Who is going to decide?
Cities would apply to choose and identify which properties that they would like to have demolished in their
Okay,
neighborhoods.
but we already know we know the scope is bigger than 50 million.
Sure.
When you get $200 million worth of applications in, the city is not going to decide. Everybody is going to be asking for this money. What's the criteria? Because ultimately, somebody's going to be winners and somebody's going to be losers on this deciding process, that sounds to me.
Sure.
Where is that written down?
So One of the things that I talked about when describing the program is that we're going to put collars on applications, and that the total amount that could be requested on behalf of cities. City applications will be limited to a certain amount. That will make it so that not one city could take the entire amount. That will make it so that other cities couldn't take a lopsided amount or not be able to compete. We believe that cities applying and identifying for properties on their own helps us address some of the neighborhood impacts and allows us to concentrate those things. So as far as what are the criteria for applications?
No, not for the application, for which ones get decided on, because there's not enough money. We've already discussed that.
Right, which properties do and don't get demolished?
Yeah, because you've already said there's not enough money in the 50 million, so somebody's not going to get there when they make their application. What's the criteria we're going to use if the county is not the decider?
So I'm not sure that I understand your question, but I'm gonna go for an answer.
Huh?
The cities will apply and propose a basket of properties.
Okay.
Could be dozens.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll
And
take you off
so-
the,
well, I can't answer
I'll
the
read it when it
question.
comes. I'll read it and see if I understand it, and we'll go from there.
Sure.
Mr. Frank, how
But-
big do you think the problem is?
Madam Chairman, to Mr. Sharon, I would suggest the gross problem is between 150 to 250 million dollars, which isn't, and in my presentation, so I mean, the intuitive question would be as well, what's $50 million going to do? But the point of my presentation was, and the studies that you heard, was there's a multiplier effect when you knock down properties and remove blight, because it encourages investment, it eliminates the need to demolish. It's not a one-to-one correlation. If you have 10,000 properties that have to get demolished and you knock down 5 of them, it doesn't mean anymore that there's 5 more thousand. You've catalyzed the market to maybe have to only do 7 or to do 6 or to do 8. And the studies have shown that. Our activities have shown it. So your question then is, well, which ones?
Well, hey, now we've already established, at least on using your numbers, which is all I was trying to get to, is that it's somewhere between 75% and 80% are not going to get demolished. And I was just trying to, because I guarantee you, those 80% are going to come in from the cities asking for the money. Or we can pretty well assume
Yeah,
that's going to happen.
and I think
so
as-
somebody is not going to get, 80% are going to be unhappy with this process, or 75% are going to be unhappy with this process.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Schron, if their attitude is they want an application to have 100% of their problems solved, that's true. And that's what the nature of all government is. You and your human resources affairs, you don't solve 100% of the problem, but you try to establish neighborhoods and build strength and capacity where you can. And that's what we're just trying to do here. I think we would be kidding ourselves if we thought we're going to solve the problem. Are we going to change the market dynamics? Are we going to have something that's transformative? I would say yes.
Well, I'm not, I think ultimately, we would hear from the mayors that communities are not built by government owning this property. They're built by the private homeowner ultimately, or the private business, or somebody converting this into an end use. I have not heard the private sector end user being discussed in this process. Mr. Miller and I served on the Clean Ohio Council. When those applications, very similar to what we're being discussed here, came in, the only way they got approved was a known end user to be part of it, whether it's a developer in this particular case, or a sector, or something around this, so that we can think strategically as opposed to a pepper shaker, and we dot the county with $50 million and think we've actually solved a problem. That's my fear, that we're going down that path.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Schron, I mean, that was the point of my presentation, and I may not have said it correctly, but 900 properties have been rehabbed by private dollars. We have not subsidized those. This is not NSP 2 or stimulus money. It's all private end users. 40% of those are homeowners. And so we do recognize what it is that you're saying. The question is why demolish one home over here and not this home over here if they're all equally two of the same apples? The one is because in this situation, you're using neighborhood typologies. Mayor Lyken is coming forward and saying, this is a retail strip. This is a place where schools are. This is a place where we have a pulse. This is a place where the size of the property and the impact is going to be great. So yes, the county is not in a position to do that. We would be lording over cities if we started doing that. Cities know the best way to do that so that we're not in fact demolishing some isolated property on an island that has no impact.
But unfortunately, this is when 75% or 80% is going to not get addressed. This is where we need to take, I think the county takes the role of the leadership and says, yes, I'm sorry, but you're going to make your best proposals. Some are going to get left out, but we're going to build it around, and I agree with your criteria, whether it's around a school, whether it's around a crossroads. We're going to, unfortunately, just by the mere nature of the dollars, and the private sector needs to be standing right there with you saying, this is a sector that should be rehabbed because it's going to coordinate. I believe that's.
Well, I would like to respond to Councilman Schron to say that that is part of our criteria. And I said it clearly, that we need to be able to demonstrate that where there's demolition, there's impact. We can't have one property among many get demolished that need it, because in that case, you wouldn't have made an impact. We need to be able to prepare property. You'd mentioned known end user. One of the challenges that's facing development in our county is that the end user that desires new space cannot wait for a site to be cleared. And you saw that in Clean, Ohio. When the need exists is when we need to respond. And so building that inventory of property is what we would do with demolition. I would also say that one of the challenges we'll face and hope to address is that we don't intend to own this property. A lot of these properties are going to be nuisance abatement, so it will not be owned by the city or the counties, and we'll be able to go after those property owners for the cost of demolition.
And Mr. Jones, it's getting hot in here. Frangos took his jacket off.
Okay, through the chair.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make your jacket. Sorry.
We're going to do fish.
I guess it's the lawyer in the county.
Through the chair to Mr. Frangos, if the additional 50 million was given to the county land bank for your model, could you manage with the staff you have now, or would you have to increase that?
Madam Chairman, to Councilman Conwell, we could manage it. We would probably have to tool up with a couple more employees, spec writers for, the mechanics. The wheel doesn't have to be reinvented, but I would need a couple more people to write specs for the added demolitions. I would probably need a couple more asbestos independent contractors to do more asbestos surveys, to do a little more field servicing. But I would anticipate 2 to 3 more people that we would probably have to put on our staff if somebody dropped $50 million onto us.
Okay, because I have to agree with Mr. Brady that we have the county land bank that's already with this model. My next question would be to Mr. Kelly, why the administration is not going with the already model that we have with the county land bank. Why are we reinventing the wheel? As well as, I just want to reinstate Greenspan's written plan presented to council. You know, a few of us want to see that, or all of us.
Councilwoman, the proposal that you have here is written in concert with the land bank. We expect that cities will choose their agents for executing the demolition, and I bet that more than 9 out of 10 cities will lean on the land bank to help them identify properties and to prosecute the demolition of those properties. Some cities have a very well-evolved demolition strategy. We want what's most efficient for the best use of these funds, and the land bank is going to be that partner. They've been very helpful in helping us identify a strategy and a plan
so this is running to the county land bank?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Jones?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me start by saying I represent a district that has been disproportionately impacted by this problem, from east side of Cleveland, Slavic Village community, and it's good to see Councilman Brancatelli, who I serve with on the land bank. And as has been said, I believe the land bank is that one institution that is capable of meeting the needs that we have here today. So I do stand with the land bank and in support of the land bank, and being a major part of the solutions that we look to bring forward. But not only do I represent a good part of the east side of Cleveland and Slavic Village, I represent inner-ring suburbs. Okay? Let me say this, I represent all of Cuyahoga County, but I'm elected by these parts. East side of Cleveland, inner-ring suburbs like Maple Heights and Garfield Heights, and these communities have needs. I was in East Cleveland, as many of my councilmen last night, and East Cleveland is the only one of 59 communities who have actively engaged this council as a result of this legislation. They called us, they emailed us, gave us a tremendous presentation that showed how important this issue was to them. So as we build this legislation, I will be coming from the philosophy, from the perspective that what dollars we do have will follow need. Okay? It's something we do in the human services world, and without a hiccup, without a lot of fuss. But I don't buy into any concepts of carve-outs or of winners and losers. That's not going to happen. There is need. In my entering suburbs of Garfield and Maple, they have lost property value because of abandoned houses. They've lost value that has impacted their budgets. And they're struggling to figure out how they're going to continue to deliver services to their communities with that need, with the issues that they have. Cleveland and East Cleveland have lost even more properties, okay? But the outer ring suburbs, and Frank Ford gave us the presentation, the property values have maintained in the outer ring suburbs. There is not a blighted demolition need to the extent of the other communities, of the other portions of Cuyahoga County. But they have been impacted negatively by this. The outer ring suburbs have had to bear the brunt of the property value taxes, property taxes that needed to be paid because property taxes were not coming from the core areas of the county. And Frank Ford gave us a number, $45 million, or what outer ring suburbs who have maintained property value, who have, over the last 13 years, their property values have maintained, whereas they have gone down in other parts of the county. But they're paying $45 million in additional property taxes because many hands make light work and there are not as many hands as there were in the past. So that is a critical number and a critical factor why outer ring suburbs can and should be in support as well. And I don't buy into this winner or loser, crab in the barrel mentality that we can't all pull together to solve this problem, to address it in some way. Numbers of 50 million, and I actually appreciate Councilman Jack Strawn by pushing for what the actual number is. And if it's upward of $250 million, the reality is if we're only dealing with 50 million or whatever that number might be, okay, then we can provide more money than any other city, any other community in this county. But as a county, even if that number is 50 million, then ultimately we should be providing leadership and how we address the problem with that dollar amount. And what I mean by that is the only reason you're a crab in the barrel is because you can't solve the whole problem. And if we start to think about the whole problem, then what we really have to think about are the banks that have been the primary culprits in where we are today. As Gus has already laid out from 2007 and the creation of the land bank in 2009, the banks have played that major role in taking these homes and after they were bailed out, taking these homes and not bailing out the homeowners, okay? In fact, they drove the homeowners away when they could have done something differently. They could have done what they were commissioned by the federal government to do when they were given that money. So as a result, they are losing lawsuits every day. And the billions of dollars that they're receiving is money that's there to play some part in this first phase, I call, which is demolition. Phase 2 is rehabbing, and it's a critical part, but we're here today, in my estimation, to discuss phase 1 and to deal with, as it's been said, the cancerous activities that are going on in the community. Okay? So that is where I stand. I do have a few questions, unless you want to comment on anything I've said so far.
We're running out of time, Mr. Jones.
Well, I want to get at least Greenspan time this time. Yeah, that- All right. Few questions. $50 million is the number that's discussed. I'm not going to push you to give us the information today, but I do want to know, we have many projects at the county, and as concerned and as I am with this demolition issue, I do have to be cognizant of the fact that I have responsibilities to the county hospital that keeps the residents of this county healthy and their needs, and along with many other issues. So we are going to need, from our financial advisors, whoever the bond counsel, we're going to need how much bonding capacity we truly have and how it all fits together. We just can't say we have 50 million, because maybe we do. But if all we have is 50 million, then we put the health of the residents of this county at jeopardy. So we have to be able to budget our money. And that is not an answer I need today, but it's going to be a part of this process, and I expect to see those numbers so that we know how much money we can apply to this particular issue. And again, at the same time, provide leadership in some way that so that we don't have to have a crab in the barrel mentality.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I'm going to exercise the prerogative of the chair to close this discussion. I just have one brief comment, and that is that, and it's probably summarize some of the what everybody else has talked about. You know, my district goes from Ward 4 or 116th and Buckeye in that area, which is, has a lot of problems with demolitions, all the way up to Pepper Pike. And, the argument is the people in Pepper Pike are paying more taxes because of the people over, over maybe the Buckeye area because the houses are blighters. So I just want to know, and I've asked this question before, and I'm not asking for an answer today, but I think that the explanation that everyone is probably asking is, there's this leap from the $50 million spent for demolition to the reduction of taxes for the people in Strongsville and Pepper Pike and all those outer ring suburbs. We need an explanation to demonstrate that leap, okay? But I appreciate all of your presentations today. It's been very informative. I appreciate the other elected officials and people who have come with their input. And we really appreciate all of your input and your continuing input. And there'll be no further action on this today. We need to have some continued studies, and we'll be doing some getting back in touch with you and possibly forming a committee to work on this. But we appreciate this. This will be an ongoing project. We thank you very much. All right. Is there anything else for the good of the whole, for the committee of the whole?
Madam
Yes.
Chair, I'd just like to read the item into the record
Okay.
officially, if I may.
Okay.
Ordinance number 2014-0014, an ordinance establishing the Cuyahoga County Property Demolition Fund and declaring the necessity that this ordinance become immediately effective.
Okay, and folks, I will be announcing it again in our regular meeting, but this is our last meeting here, and so if you'd like to clean off some of the paperwork that you don't need carried to the new building, I'd appreciate, we got a recycle bin, 'cause otherwise Joe Nani and Trevor will be hauling all this stuff over, so if you'd like to clean some of this stuff, what you want to keep, if you want to leave in the red folders or right around the red folders, it'll be easier for us. So if there's nothing else, we stand adjourned until 5 o'clock.